Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, September 11th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With us, as always, Executive Editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior Editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Washington Commentary columnist Matthew Connetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Social Commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, our longtime former colleague and commentary contributor, National Review's Noah Rothman. Hi, Noah.
Hi, John.
Noah's joining us today because for the past 10 years, even after he departed Commentary's staff, he has been the person that we go to try to make sense of the creeping and growing acts of overt political violence in the United States, beginning with articles he wrote in 2016 and then continuing to the beginning of this year when his piece Clockwork Blue appeared on our cover. Noah is now fashioning that article or using it as the source material for a book that he is writing on this topic that obviously exploded into our consciousnesses yesterday afternoon with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I did not have time because I was having trouble logging in to pull up Noah's piece of Clockwork Blue, but maybe, Noah, you can dig up the tweet that you used that quoted the last paragraph of the piece you wrote, which you put up last night, because I think it is a very strong jumping off point, again, written at the end of last year, published, at the beginning of this year.
Sure. Thank you. I'm pulling it up. I did not plan to make my niche political violence in America, specifically left-wing political violence in America. I don't think I'm properly insured for this line of work that I'm putting myself together with.
You say that, and you say that it's not a bad line, but this is no joke. By which I mean, obviously, nothing that we're saying today is a joke, particularly on this 24th anniversary of 9/11. But speaking to people who do what Charlie Kirk does for a living, and a lot of other people have done, the chilling effect of the event yesterday is real. People are canceling speaking events. Speaking events are being redesigned to make sure that they are indoors, this is going to be yet another moment at which certain types of freedoms are going to end up having to be curtailed for safety reasons, because how can anybody be sure that if they are out and about somewhere or doing something on a college campus or something, there won't be somebody with a rifle on a roof ready to shoot them.
That was one of the objectives of the attack. We should just point out.
Yes.
It's not just an assassination of a 31-year-old man married with two small children. It was an attack on the free society.
Yes.
And I think that's one reason why America is shaken.
Yes.
In a way that we haven't been for some time. And it's grimly symbolic that it happened on the eve of the 24th anniversary of the September 11th attacks.
Right.
So just to summarize,
not at all. It happened on a college campus.
Yeah.
And I think that is a particular interest in this. College campuses are supposed to be places of free and open debate. They're supposed to be places where someone like Charlie Kirk can come and attempt to persuade young people about the validity of his ideas. And what we've seen over the past generation is that instead of being places of free inquiry and free discourse, college campuses have become petri dishes of nihilism and radicalism. I'm not talking about this particular campus. I don't know it. I never heard of it until the news broke yesterday afternoon. But what we do know, especially in the years since October 7th, is that these universities have become the source of real fascism in this country and the sort of violence and evil ideologies that not only killed Charlie Kirk, but also killed a United Healthcare executive, that also lead to the attacks on Christian schools and churches, and that also contribute to the firebombing of the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania's home and the 2 assassination attempts on President Trump.
So, Noah, can you
Sure.
read your concluding paragraph?
Yes, it ends thusly. We've been lucky that no single act has set off a truly cataclysmic chain reaction, but the potential for a spiraling cascade of violence and reprisals is ever present. And one day soon, unless we grow sick of the sight of blood or become revolted by the thought of an America descending into actual political carnage, and unless the left is willing to take a look, a long, hard look in the mirror, our luck will run out.
So our luck ran out yesterday. I mean, it may not be that, our luck, we're drained of luck. This is a signal event in 1,000 different ways. But here's what I was thinking about. And Christine, if Noah is our political violence expert, you're our social media is an evil expert. Within 5 seconds of the shooting of Charlie Kirk, I saw footage of the murder of Charlie Kirk right in front of me on this little screen on Twitter, on X. This is an image that I did not need to see, that was of no value. It's a snuff film. I watched this guy being killed practically in real time. And within minutes, of course, all over the place, while the vast majority of the commentary that I saw reared in horror, politicians on all sides of the political aisle talking about the horror of what's happened here and all of that. Nonetheless, there was still this bubbling up of what you might call kind of like this poisoned public opinion that welcomed this killing, that celebrated this, that made jokes about this killing, and depersonalized, dehumanized Kirk as he was dying in the emergency room. And, I was thinking this about 9/11 and what would have happened had there been social media on 9/11, and how it would have been 3 minutes before the fire can't melt steel. The Jews did it. That person that we see jumping off the building actually isn't really jumping off the building. It's a fake. The photo's a fake. The event is a false flag. George W. Bush did it. All of that stuff that was kind of in the sort of the noxious subculture would have been right out in front of us, right in our faces. And, that's part and parcel of why our luck ran out here in Noah's formulation.
Well, I regret to say, I say this with no happiness at all, but we're not going back to a time where those things aren't going to be shown immediately and spread immediately. But I will say this, it also exposes the reality of some, quite frankly, evil minds in society. It does also spread that evil, as you say. We don't know if the person who shot him was left-leaning in their ideology. We don't know that. But we do know that a lot of people on the left celebrated the fact that he was shot. And that is horrifying. That's just absolutely unacceptable. I will say that one of the audiences that Charlie Kirk really connected to, and starting, at least for my kids' age range, they're 19, when they were in middle school, they all got to know Charlie often initially online through social media. And a lot of them who then went on to college campuses where they did feel like they had to hide their conservative beliefs were really heartened by his message of, no, get out there, say what you believe, argue with people who disagree with you. That's how you persuade others. And you do it in a way that is the opposite of violence. And so I think in a weird way, a lot of people who came to understand and respect Charlie's work as young people were horrified the minute they saw that video. My son texted me and said, did you see what happened? And I knew immediately they were talking about Charlie Kirk. And they weren't big Charlie Kirk fans. They came across him when they were younger and listened to, would watch some of his videos and stuff. But he is very important to this young generation of voters who got to know him in very formative years and now see what happened to his message of arguing that persuasion and democratic deliberation and all of the things. Look, he was a total meme lord when he first started out. I was not a huge fan of some of the things he used to say, but he really connected to young people. And the reason that this is another signal moment is that an entire generation that grew up on social media watched him die on social media.
Well, and it's not just that he watched him die. I think and I don't watch that type of thing, and I'm not so sure actually that it's inevitable that we'll see it in the future. It's the way that we're headed as a country doesn't necessarily end in anarchy. It ends in top-down authority. All right, and so that's just left to be seen. What type of measures will be imposed eventually if this goes on? But I was struck by the video of him prior to the assassination. He had such joy. It was so visible. He was smiling. He was tossing hats out to the crowd. He was clearly happy to be there at the start of this tour that was going to take him to college campuses all over the country. This is what he was meant to do, to appeal to young people. And the young people themselves were joyful. They were happy to be there. Even the ones, I'm sure, who were liberals or progressives, who were looking forward to the chance to sit in front of him and argue with him, which he welcomed, right? That was kind of the shtick of these tours. And so there's no clear contrast between the two futures that America must choose between than what preceded the event and the aftermath of the event. And the fact that this assassin was on a roof 200 meters or yards away in a very disturbingly similar technique than to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania last year. That suggests that this was not a lunatic, who was taking a moment of opportunity to kill someone famous, but a premeditated, cold blood killing. And just like Mangione, gunning down that United Healthcare executive, also the father of 2 young children, in the back. That's the danger that awaits America.
Noah, we talked about your writing A Clockwork Blue, the piece that we published, because of the murder of Luigi Mangione. And the response...
the murder of Brian Thompson, healthcare.
Excuse me, the Luigi Mangione, murder of Brian Thompson.
Yeah.
Because not only did it happen in broad daylight, 6:45 in the morning in Midtown Manhattan, but it was almost instantaneous that the murder started to be either excused away, explained away, or celebrated by, and not by a world of psychopathy. We're talking about Bernie Sanders, who said there should never be, as you say in a passage in the piece, there should never be political violence like this. But
there were a lot
Americans are very angry about healthcare. So therefore, implicitly, Brian Thompson and everybody like him had it coming.
Yeah,
right?
Elizabeth Warren, Chris Murphy, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, all of them deployed the very loaded butt in order to find some justification for their own political program that they could scrape off a crime scene floor. Matt's point is very important. I've been staring into the abyss now for a couple of months, and the extent to which individuals who are radicalized, usually self-radicalization. We talk a lot about self-radicalization because we don't necessarily have small cell violence in this country, but we do. It does still exist. The attacks on the ICE centers over the course of the summer, some of which were very sophisticated operations, tactically adroit, in which individuals would hide in tree lines and create distractions and lure ICE agents out and then sabotage them. It's militarily smart. But we mostly have radicalized individuals like this, and they take their cues from people who execute violent attacks, like what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, like what happened at the president's property in Florida. But they also take solace from the notion that the people they respect and like may want to see stuff like this. So when the vast majority of the progressive, far left progressive intellectual infrastructure in this country rallies around the notion that, it's sort of not great that we're killing fathers who committed no crime other than to work in a sector that we don't necessarily like. But it does demonstrate the degree to which everybody's angry. And I can channel that anger. I can harness that anger towards my own political ends. That is the delusion that has afflicted the Democratic political class for the better part of this century. It didn't begin with the killing of Brian Thompson, as I demonstrate in that article and will subsequently demonstrate in the book. You can see it throughout the 2010s and a little bit earlier in the aughts. There was, for example, just jumps out of my head, in 2016, a number of Dallas police officers were targeted in a military-style campaign of assassinations from a rooftop shooter who was dispatched with a robot. And the president didn't exactly eulogize him, but found in this killer a measure of determination and gumption and righteous grievance that needed an airing, that we could not ignore, needed to be heard. That is the sort of thing that people take inspiration from, especially those who are not especially, don't have a lot of cultural moorings, don't have a lot of relationships in their life, are atomized and adrift. And those people can cause real havoc. We talk about the riots. That's a problem. That's something that is sort of a different category of violence, because you, as a properly adjusted individual, can succumb to the lizard brain that just attracts you to mob violence and compels you to participate in mob violence in ways you otherwise wouldn't in any other sane situation. But the radical individual who shatters the social contract with one insane act of violence like this can foment those mobs, and those mobs can attract sane people to them to do insane things. And that's how this also begins, and it doesn't just end easily.
I just want to add, there's two things about this that make this a bit more, that make it a bit scarier, I think, for people. The first is that they don't have a shooter in custody. This is the morning after. So the first is that what we usually see with these acts of violence, even in Minnesota, where that lunatic shot members of the Democratic members of the state house, before he was found, his car was found, right, with materials and stuff like that. We're used to seeing evidence and a manifesto and a this and a that. We're used to seeing names and people combing their social media. And obviously, at first, people can get it wrong. People got it wrong yesterday. Two people were arrested who are not involved, in the crime, and that happened in New York, also at the NFL shooting. But we're used to right away getting some feedback into the political world, into the political mind of the person at the heart of this. And this feels more like when there was a DC sniper, all those years ago on the loose, and without knowing who it was or why exactly, there's a sort of randomized feel to it. And the randomized feel to it is the other thing that makes this a harder week, which was the stabbing on the train just a couple days earlier.
Well, it was a couple weeks earlier. It only became a news story that last week. Seth, right. I got to stop you because I got to repeat what I think you're going in the wrong direction here. I think Matt made the point. This was not a randomized moment. We're not at risk. Ordinary people are not at risk from somebody getting on a rooftop at a college gathering and then using essentially sniper skills that were likely learned in a military setting to assassinate somebody. That is not. The train is a random threat. Psychotics and schizophrenics who push people off platforms are a random threat. This is directed political violence. It is an entirely different matter. What's striking about it, just quickly, is 25 years ago, nobody in the world would have known who Charlie Kirk was. He's a political operative who rose through the ranks of sort of being a young Republican, was a prodigy, figured out how to be a successful get out the vote guy, and then also became a kind of celebrity using social media. But the Charlie Kirk of 25 years ago, nobody would have known. Nobody would ever have taken, there were like 3 or 4 political consultants that whose existence people knew of, right? There was there was Carville, there was Madeline, there was Karl Rove, there was Lee Atwater. Nobody knew who these people were. And now everybody who has any kind of high-scale public profile involvement in political life in the United States has a target on his head or in his back or on his neck.
We all
That's
feel that
what
way.
this message
That's
is.
what makes it disturbing to people.
Yeah.
Because it's different from the random shootings, which of course do occur and which do make everybody scared. But in this particular case, it wasn't random. It was directed at a political figure, but this was not an elected official. This wasn't even a political consultant. He was not a member of the cabinet. He is a political activist. He is a social media personality. And what that means is that it widens the aperture for potential targets, so that, as John says, anyone involved in public life now is thinking, what am I under threat? Should I watch what I say? But that is exactly what this assassin meant to achieve, and why it's so important to resist that temptation to remain silent.
You know, Seth said something really important there, actually, that I think is going to be something I'm going to be focusing on a lot, which is the mechanisms that the left uses to avoid confronting the degree to which a lot of this violence, most of the violence now in this particular period of American violence, is coming from the left. Ezra Klein did this yesterday. New York Time magazine, you know, we're in a crisis of political violence. All of a sudden, everybody's tuning in to something we've been focused on for a long time, right? But they see violence, political violence from the right, where it doesn't necessarily exist. They're buttressed by all these statistics, a lot of which are category errors, but statistics that demonstrate to them that the right is the font from which all political violence springs, and they attribute events that are not political terrorism to the left. Ezra Klein attributed the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer to one of these events, which was an event in which all the conspirators were FBI informants and everybody else was acquitted. He talked about how the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband was right-wing violence. The guy was a schizophrenic. He wasn't acting on any orders. In fact, the degree to which there was any support for him from the far-right fringes was really muted. And yet they see this as just right-wing terrorism. The assassination of the Minnesota House Speaker, Melissa Hartman, and her husband, this is evidence of a political act of political terrorism to the left. And when the trial happens, and when we review the degree to which this individual was unhinged, was acting out politically against people he knew personally, but nevertheless not in support of some sort of a political agenda, not revolutionary violence designed to foment a broader outrage and a broader direct action campaign. They have a variety of category errors into which they retreat that allows them to say, now that they recognize political violence is everywhere, oh, it's everybody, it's everything, it's everybody, it's nebulous, it's society, no one's to blame. And only a couple of months ago, they were saying this is a right-wing thing. So they will not recognize it.
And also, just to finish the point that I was trying to make before, is that if you were sitting next to Charlie Kirk yesterday, as people were, you were sitting next to a guy who was shot, right? If you were sitting on the train, there were people sitting nearby when an open attack was going on. And both of the things that we said afterwards were that this could change the way that people relate to these environments in which the violence is happening, right? On the train, anybody who's seen that video will have a hard time sitting there staring at their phone and not, blinking at shadows or whatever. But these are the types of events that change the way we interact with our environment. And people are already talking about open air events. And we had those discussions of open air events after Trump was shot. And so, this week, I know that the train thing, as you said, was not this week, but it became a story this week in the last few days, was that people are starting to wonder, a shot rings out on a college campus where normally it's safe. Somebody gets stabbed on a train where normally it's safe. People are looking around, regular, normal people are looking around and are going to be seeing and feeling danger in multiple areas where maybe even 2 weeks ago, they didn't feel the same way. In part because, as you said, Charlie Kirk is not the president giving a speech who was shot at, but because he was essentially a kind of influencer more than anything, and the way that people fall into those categories today.
I want to add another reason why I think people are so disturbed by this, and that is Charlie Kirk's age. He was 31 years old. He had achieved so much in such a short span of time. He came onto the scene when he was 18 years old. He began impressing kind of wealthy older Republicans by his polemical skills and by his energy. He turned a turning point from an idea into an incredibly influential organization, the equivalent of the Young Americans for Freedom, which powered the conservative movement after it was founded in 1960. And he did it with just a tremendous energy and verve, but always a positive mental attitude. There was a New York Times profile of him some time ago. And of course, the Times journalist went in probably extremely skeptical antagonistic towards Kirk's political views. But what they came away from their time with him was that he was a good person. At 31 years old, he was a good person. No drinking, no drugs, a devout Christian, someone who was married. He had 2 small children he cared about deeply. A friend to Israel.
I want to talk about that. But let's
importantly, and the fact that is cut off.
Yeah,
it's cut off in an afternoon.
Yeah,
can I suddenly? That is, I think, is what is spooked this country.
Yeah. I just want to amplify this point about the broadening of targets on the left. That's been happening steadily. I mean, when before was a healthcare CEO considered a political target? There's a broadening of targets in part because there's a growing list of leftist, exotic, violent political ideologies. There are these manifestos that come, trans manifestos, anti-tech, anti-healthcare. There's sort of, of course, throw in the anti-Semitism now. There are, so when there's some shooting at this point, it's political, it's ideological. You don't know what from under which one of these radical rocks the shooter crawled out.
But
from.
it's all inflected with revolution.
Yes,
yeah, and
right.
It's all part of the Omni
with
cause.
left-wing revolution.
That's right, exactly.
Much the same way that
the violence sort of mimics the Omni cause. Yeah,
right. Now, I want to dial back to 2018. Adam Rubinstein, who works at the Free Press and was a staffer at the Weekly Standard just before it shuttered, has a piece in the Free Press alongside a wonderful piece by Matt that everybody should read this morning called The Charlie Kirk I Knew. And the story he tells, going back to 2018, I was very suspicious of Charlie Kirk. He just seemed to me to be like one of these Trump kids, MAGA kids around, but I found them all, I thought maybe they were all sort of hustlers, or they were just like attaching to whatever was the latest fad. And, there was all that incredibly sort of ugliness of the sort of the Trump supporter in 2016. And I wasn't paying that much attention to him, but I just assumed he was like one of these people. So Adam went and spent a week and did a profile of Charlie Kirk that appeared on the cover of the Weekly Standard a couple of months before the Weekly Standard went out of business. And the morning that it came out, he got some email or text from somebody in the Trump White House calling him a cockroach and a shill and a monster for how he had portrayed Charlie Kirk. And then he was kind of sitting there shaken in his account. And then he gets a text from Charlie Kirk who says, "Hey, great job." And then a couple of months later, they're on a plane together, and Charlie Kirk asks, they happen to be on the same plane. Charlie Kirk asks whoever is sitting next to Adam if he would mind trading seats or trading places. And then they sat there and sort of like caught up. So this is 7 years before, this is before this massive degree of success that he had had. He was not 31. He was 24 or 23. And clearly my snap judgment of who he must have been then was extraordinarily unjust.
Well, we did talk about. I mean, I was at the Weekly Standard, that I remember the sort of editorial discussions of this piece, and Adam was also quite a young reporter. Like, this was a big
he
story
was also
for him.
24 or 20. Yeah.
And he's he's amazing. But there was the thing is, Kirk was very much a performance artist at that stage of his career, and it's why he was so compelling, particularly to the young people who came of age online in the meme wars and the crying liberal tears age. But what I think is important to look at is how rapidly and in a sophisticated way he grew. He actually, his rhetoric in the last few years is quite different from what he sounded like in 2016. He started writing books, and the happy warrior stuff, which I think, Matt, you used that phrase in your wonderful piece. That was real. It was at the core of his character and his temperament. And that, I think, is why, if we have a chance to talk about why he was also vehemently opposed to the anti-Semitism that was developing on the right, those people listened to him. And it was very important that he spoke to that. And I think it spoke to his core character and temperament and judgment in a way for someone who was so young could actually develop and learn over time.
I want to pick up on that because I want to mention another injustice that I did to Charlie Kirk that I deeply regret and have deeply regretted over time, but very, very minor. So he basically is on a knife's edge is the wrong term, but because of where he was situated in the political discussion. So he is somebody who is friends with the NatCons and friends with Ben Shapiro. I don't know if you can sort of like, I don't want to get into like this kind of, parochial right-wing divisions and stuff like that. But, he was somebody who supported Israel, but a lot of the people who were in his camp and who would come to his conferences, excuse me, were following the direction of some of these people in an anti-Israel direction, right? The sort of the people in his ambit were themselves starting to say that, this war was, why were we involved? And what does Israel have in us? And why do people care? And all this, and kind of participating in mild anti-Semitic rhetoric of their own. And he had a kind of choice to make. And when he was in the middle of this last year or something like that, I tweeted something out. He had said something, and I tweeted something out dismissive of him. And a couple of very pro-Israel people of my acquaintance, known to people who are listening, but it's a private thing, like got in touch with me and said, what are you doing? He's a friend of ours. Like, we don't want to give, he's a friend of ours, and we're trying to, stiffen his spine and make sure that he doesn't go down this bad path that so many in the J.D. Vance world are going down. Don't do this, stop. And you're not helping. And I'm like, well, I'm not here to help. He said something, I criticized it. I don't even remember what he said. But whatever the story here is, he decided to make his stand and pitch his tent in the conversation on the right, on the side of the righteousness and justice of Israel's cause in Gaza and Israel's existence as our foremost ally and, share of the same civilizational aspects that are, the fundaments of both Israel and the United States. And he needn't have gone there. If you're a vanguarder, you probably were kind of more tempted to go the other way. So that needs to be mentioned as well, which is one of the reasons why we don't know who killed him. And it's incredibly unnerving to me that there is some possibility that we'll never find who killed him. And, the world in which we don't understand the motivations of the people who do these things, like the kid in Butler, like the guy who shot, at the concert at the Mandalay Bay Hotel in Las Vegas, it is very societally disturbing that we can't pinpoint a cause. But for all we know, this was it was because of his support for Israel that he was shot down.
Well,
Maybe
can
it
I
was
can
a-
I connect
we don't
something?
know.
Can I
Yeah.
connect what you and Christine were both saying about, because Christine's point about him growing up is important, because we have come through an era in which lots of, especially on the, it seems more so on the right wing, influencers start young and they become famous, and they become famous at 16, 17, right? They give a speech at CPAC, and and they sort of grow up before our eyes, which is one thing. And but to connect it to what you were saying, I don't know, a month or so ago, I wrote about something that happened on Charlie Kirk's show, and this I think really was a perfect example of what he was trying to do now. A mother called into his show and said, my son, he's been thinking for himself a lot recently and doing his own research and all that other stuff. And I've been very proud of him because he was suspicious of some of the stuff coming from Fauci during COVID, and he was suspicious of some of the restrictions, and he looked it up for himself, and he sort of made up his own mind, and he wasn't a sheep and all this stuff. However, and then Charlie Kirk said, you're going to say he has fallen down a rabbit hole of online anti-Semitism, aren't you? And she said, yes. She said, I'm very worried because the path of questioning authority for yourself and questioning, what everybody is telling you to do has led him so far down that rabbit hole that he is now questioning basically everything. And it ends up where conspiracy theories end up, which is anti-Semitism. And so Charlie Kirk, she said, listen, I want him to be a free-thinking young conservative. I want him to challenge the status quo, and I want him to question things. But how do we do that in a way that he doesn't fall all the way through the black hole of the internet into this dark, underbelly? And Charlie Kirk said, I knew what you were going to say because I have gone through that period fairly recently in my life. Not that Charlie Kirk fell into a black hole of anti-Semitism, but because he's young, because he was 31, and because he knows what young conservative men encounter on the internet. And then he said, you need to talk about anti-Semitism in the context of these other conspiracies as a way of what your son is doing is he's falling into a trap. When he's questioning things, he's taking personal responsibility. That's a good conservative thing. When he falls into blaming one group of people for all the troubles in the world and bad things that happen to him, he is shirking personal responsibility. It is laziness, and it is it will become a character flaw if these people grow up to be the sort of people who will blame one group for everything bad that happened to them. It is scapegoating, and it's not just anti-Semitism and bad because it's bigotry, but because it is scrambling young people's, especially young men's brains into thinking into a completely different way than they were. And that, I think, really connects why, as Christine said, we saw him grow up and we saw his rhetoric change as he lived through these different periods. And also on the anti-Semitism thing, that he had a specific way of talking about it from a non-Jewish perspective to other non-Jews that was extraordinarily valuable.
And that's what we've been robbed of.
Yeah,
and
Matt,
that's what's so awful.
I want to ask you this. You gotta jump, but Luigi Mangione emerges and shoots Brian Thompson in December in New York, or November, whatever it was. 6 months earlier, maybe a year earlier, a movie comes out called The Menu with Ralph Fiennes about a bunch of rich leading industrialists who go to an island where there is a famous chef. It's a restaurant on this island, and the chef decides he's going to they're going to play a game in which he basically is going to kill them all because they're so evil. This is a satire. Okay, so that's exhibit number one. Exhibit number two, a movie about to come out in about a month called Begonia, made by the director Yorgos Lanthimos, starring Emma Stone. Both, by the way, signatories to this evil letter saying that Jewish money should be boycotted by Hollywood. This is a movie about a guy who decides that a healthcare executive, I believe, or a senior CEO played by Emma Stone, is an alien, and he kidnaps her and he chains her in the basement and he shaves her head because, according to him, she's getting alien signals through her hair. And the movie apparently is a cat and mouse game in which she tries to keep herself alive by negotiating with this guy or playing games with him, like in The King of Comedy or something like that. But this is a movie that basically lionizes the kidnapping and torture of a CEO because of, political reasons. And I assume that the twist is that she is an alien, or if she's not an alien, she's a demon or something like that. Another movie with Anya Taylor-Joy coming out later this year that has some form of a similar plot. And in 2 weeks, Leonardo DiCaprio's $150 million movie, One Battle After Another, which is about a weatherman, the 1970s, radical, and the reemergence of the need to do domestic bombings in the United States in the 2020s in some fashion or other. So what's happening here is the culture is making the world safe for the idea that it is okay to parlay political violence as long as the violence is against people we don't like, who are reps of like capitalism or politics or law enforcement or whatever.
It's dehumanizing. And it starts, I think, in the universities. I think it starts with postmodernism. It starts with gender ideology. It starts with 1619 Project, a concerted attack on all of the pillars of American society and the beliefs that uphold Western civilization. And it's been growing for some time. It's now, as you say, it's present in the culture. We had that recent poll just in the past few days talking about how among progressive women, life priorities have collapsed, right? The belief in marriage and children has just plummeted. We see that the Democrats have turned against capitalism. This is what they've been taught, and we've spoken about it on this program before. This idea that we have now every year new graduates who have meaningless degrees, few prospects, a load of debt, and mounds of entitlement and resentment. They are the shock troops. They're the shock troops,
right?
For this type of fascism that's coming.
Right. We have a literal number from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Poll released on Tuesday. 34% of college students recently said they supported using violence in some circumstances to stop a campus speech.
I just want to say one thing before I go. I just want to say one thing about the hunt for the killer. We should remember it did take a business week, 5 days, to find Mangione. And now he committed his heinous act in New York City, where there's many surveillance cameras. This campus is different, but I do think that we still have the possibility of finding the killer. And I think it's very important, whoever the assassin is, that we do not give them any publicity. I think one thing we have to do in order to stop this period of violence from getting out of control is to deny the actors not just freedom by going after them and punishing them, but also the oxygen of celebrity, which only will inspire copycats.
Well, Matt, as you go, maybe Christine, you just said we're not putting that genie back in the bottle. I mean, it's going to be very, very hard. Already yesterday, 2 possible suspects were taken into custody, and we knew who they were 5 minutes after they were taken. I assume because people in the FBI were leaking their identity. So we saw pictures of 2 of them.
Yeah, I want to hear from Noah about these arrests, because I am not a fan of Kash Patel and would really love to see anybody else heading the FBI for an investigation like this. But I'm curious, Noah, if that kind of attempt. Is that common in these things to identify, to arrest two people and then release them?
Well, I don't know. I'm not abreast of what law enforcement's processes are like this. What I would say is probably it's not common for the FBI to announce that it has a suspect in its custody and then release them
on social media.
Probably, and
well,
then
to be
and then
fair,
leak the
I
identity.
don't think the FBI formally announced that they had suspects in custody. We knew that
Cash
one
Patel
of them had
did.
been arrested.
He was
because there
tweeting it,
footage.
John.
Cash
Cash
Patel said
Patel
we
was
had
tweeting it.
he has a suspect in custody. His
I'm sorry.
The suspect's identity was released to the public illicitly.
Right,
and
that's
then,
what I'm saying. Right,
and then they subsequently said no. That is a breach of protocol.
Okay,
as far
fair
as
enough.
I
I'm sorry, I was mistaken.
Nevertheless, just
Yeah,
a couple of points you had mentioned this growing comfort with political violence, or at least telling pollsters that you're comfortable with it. That's been on the rise. When I wrote my first book on this in 2017, it was about 20% of college students who were polled by UCLA's John Villasenor that said they were comfortable with using political violence to silence speech with which they disagreed. But a brief point on your cultural products that are sort of acclimating Americans to violence. That is a response to demand. There is a supply because there is a demand for this sort of content, and it bubbles up from beneath. The killing of Wesley LePatner.
So Wesley LePatner was shot in Midtown Manhattan in the lobby of Blackstone.
By a crazy person. By a person who thought he was meting out vengeance against the NFL for imagined slights.
Right.
That was an act of random, senseless violence. But from beneath, there was a sensibility, a rationality to it that was invented and attached to the killer's motives. An anti-capitalist motive, a revolutionary motive, a socialist motive. And if you dig into a lot of these acts of violence, whether they're Luddism, whether it's anti-technology, whether it's environmental, whether it's anti-healthcare, it's all revolutionary violence of the sort that is very familiar to students of the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s, to students of the 1910s and 1920s. It's very familiar
to
violence.
Russian intellectuals of the 1860s.
It preceded the Soviet Revolution. It preceded the Soviet Revolution.
No, I mean it's the subject of the great work of Dostoevsky, and was the cause of the assassination of the reformist Tsar Alexander II in 1881 that led to the installation. This is Matt's point, even though Matt has left. The installation of a very authoritarian. As Russia was liberalizing, the killing of Alexander II led his son Alexander III to crack down on liberty and freedom.
This can all sound really arcane
Russia.
And academic.
It's not arcane at all.
It's not at all. It is absolutely relevant to our current condition, up to and including the anti-Semitic violence with which we've been living for the last 2 years now. The Soviets created the notion that, otherwise you would be like, what is the connection between anti-Israel violence and leftist revolutionary anti-capitalist politics? And the answer is the Soviet Union. It created that connection, made an academic theory out of it, anti-Zionism, and exported it liberally in order to convey the notion that this individual nation is antithetical to the proletarian consciousness, blah 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 blah. But the bottom line is it's all one facet of the same revolutionary ethos, a violent revolutionary ethos. It's not hard to draw the strings that connect one to the other.
And there's also culturally, I'm intrigued by, John, what you were laying out with these movies. But I remember discussions we had on this podcast about the rise of the anti-hero and sort of, superhero movies and the sort of glamorization of the dark superhero. But healthy cultures use anti-heroes as a lesson, right? It's sort of, this is where we don't want to go. And what I see culturally, both in the movies you mentioned, John, but just generally bubbling up from beneath on social media, as you say, Noah, is a glorification of the anti-hero. That's a sign of a nihilistic culture, where the anti-hero is the only person who can act on cultural and political questions. And that's a very dangerous cultural position.
Perspective is really important. I mean, you can always go to social media and find a bunch of idiots and insane nihilists who are saying the worst possible thing and make an example out of them. But the people who respond to those things are the people in political positions of political authority who talk, who condemn Luigi Mangione, but it's the president of the United States who says that the massacre of police officers in Dallas is a horrible thing. But that is the incentive structure that's being created from the bottom, and it's being responded to by people at the top. So you cannot say it does not matter. You can't say it's irrelevant. It's extremely relevant.
I just want to read another little, just a cultural detail, like it's a ridiculous little cultural detail, but yeah. So we are now creating. People are creating cultural heroes out of these sort of late capitalist critics that are taking their late capitalist criticism and turning it into action and violence, right? So there is again a movie review. I'm sorry to go this way, but it's an interesting way of showing how things seep, or how ideas seep into the larger culture. Movie coming out with Elizabeth Olsen and Miles Teller called Eternity, which is basically a ripoff of Defending Your Life. People die and they go to heaven, and they get to choose at this train depot limbo what kind of forever they'd like. Where could they live? So here are the choices, according to Richard Lawson in Hollywood Reporter, that the movie posits. Will it be an unending day at the beach? A million lifetimes spent as a libertine in queer world? Maybe a trip to the political Eden of Marxist world, though we're told, that one's all booked up. The political Eden of Marxist world. Now, even 30 years ago,
screenwriters never read a history book. Let's just state that.
No, I mean, 30 years ago, even then, you wouldn't. I mean, Marxist world is a dystopian nightmare of gulags and mass murders, in which Soviet Union and China together in their Marxist totalitarianism murdered close to 150 million people. So this is now 2025. You're making a movie about how everybody wants to live in Marxist world. Like, when you say there's a demand, I don't know if there's a demand. What there is a cultural set of attitudes that is taken up by the people at the high summits of our culture. Movie producers, financiers, writers, directors, actors, performers, that thinks is kind of jazzed by this idea. Let's make a movie about kidnapping an executive, and talk about late capitalism and how evil late capitalism is, as we sit in our homes in Malibu and make, as Emma Stone probably does, $40 million a year. But we hate capitalism, don't we? And when we project the idea that we hate capitalism and we don't like democracy and we like violence against people that we don't like, and it all comes together, you got a guy on a roof with a rifle. Now, I don't know that that's what's motivating him, because, again, for all I know, this is some kind of an Islamist attack, or it's something like that, where we have the total sort of the circular effect of the Marxist anti-Zionism, which Marxism being, of course, anti-religious, opposed to religion and doctrine, now supplying radical theocrats and believers in the Ummah and all of that with their arguments that they then use to convince people to go and break through the fence at the Gaza envelope and murder and injure 5,000 Jews just for being Jews. So the world is a very complicated place, but what we have here is we have lost our antibodies against this, and society had them, and it's losing them, and it's losing them rapidly.
But really, I mean, you could say, if you survey American history, that those antibodies were the exception, not the rule.
Well, this has not been a country awash in political violence.
Not in the last 20,
No, but
30
we've
years.
had major cycles of political violence. Noah's right.
We have.
I mean,
no, we've had cycles, and
just
then
right,
they last a while.
Right, yeah. Look, we were talking about this last night, or I was talking about this last night, or on texts, that we had this period that began, obviously, there are hints of it before, with assassination efforts by Puerto Rican nationalists on Harry Truman. But the, assassination era begins with JFK in 1963, right? Political violence. He was shot by a communist, by somebody who had recently returned from the Soviet Union and was head of the Fair Play for Cuba committee, shot by a communist. Then his brother is killed by a Palestinian terrorist. Martin Luther King is killed in the same year, earlier than RFK, 68 and 72. George Wallace is paralyzed by Arthur Bremer's bullet. In 1975, Gerald Ford, 2 assassination attempts in 18 days by female members of the Manson family. 1978, George Moscone, the mayor of San Francisco, is killed by Dan White. 1979, Aldo Moro, the prime minister of Italy, is kidnapped and then murdered by a radical terrorist group. And then in 1981, of course, within the span of 3 weeks, Ronald Reagan is nearly killed by an assassin's bullet. And then the Pope, John Paul II, is nearly killed by an assassin's bullet. And then the assassination era stopped. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows the reasons. It was as though we had this almost 20-year spasm of political violence aimed at people at the very top. Now, maybe security got better. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can say that would explain this. But we had this spasm, and then it ended. We had this spasm in the 70s, leading up, I think, to Jim Jones and the People's Temple, that was a radical leftist group from San Francisco. They go to Guyana. They set up Jonestown. Someone goes to figure out what's going on. A Congressman, Leo Ryan, he's shot, and then they all commit suicide. And somehow that period of nihilistic left-wing psychosis that had gripped so much of the country, Patty Hearst, there's all this stuff, ended. It kind of just, it stopped. Like, it was too much. And maybe hopeful in hope, I just don't feel this way, this will be too much. The Charlie Kirk is too much. Of course, the possibility is it's the opposite. That Charlie Kirk is the beginning and not the end. Charlie Kirk, there's going to be the nightmare scenario is there's a response, right? Somebody from the right goes out and shoots somebody, some version of Charlie, goes and shoots a version of Charlie Kirk from the left.
That's the other thing.
The riot, the campus riots by evil, by these evil actors for 2 years are met with counter riots if they start again. And then there's actual physical confrontations on college campuses between posses. If they start encampments again, and then someone goes in and decides that they're going to go set those encampments on fire, or like go through and shoot people in the tents or something like that. We don't know.
Well, I'm curious what everyone else thinks about the president's response. And actually, Noah, I know you have to go, but what did you think of Trump's response? I never get Noah on here, so that's why I'm like.
So I watched it, and I thought it was appropriate for the time that we're in. A lot of the words that came out of his mouth could have come out of my mouth, and they're really verbatim what I'm writing and what I have written for commentary. And it's important to acknowledge our shared reality, and the president should do that. There is a school of thought that would say it's more the president's place to restore calm, to appeal to our better angels, to not acknowledge what the potential motives that are informed by our experience about who this shooter likely is. But nevertheless, the president, having no suspect in custody, perhaps should have been a little less sure of that. I'm sensitive to those criticisms of him. However, he did acknowledge what we're all talking about, and which Americans need to be confronted with, which is the degree to which we have a spasm of left-oriented violence, more prominent than right-wing violence. But it is also true, John, as you say, that those who execute political violence do so usually fully convinced of their own righteousness, because it is a response to the last act of violence. and so on and so on and so on. And political violence begets more political violence because it is retaliatory. And that's how you get these never-ending cycles that cascade and end up in something really, really bad.
Well, no, you got to go. So thank you for joining us, and I wish you hadn't had to.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Okay. To continue our conversation here, because we're only scratching the surface, and we've gone an hour, but I think we can go a little longer here in this conversation. So I started with social media, which may seem like a weird place to start, and maybe I'm too online, like everybody else, including the shooter, and Charlie Kirk, and everybody else is all too online. But this is it's like this is the water in which we swim. This is the atmosphere. This is the world in which we now live.
It's also the medium in which the horror spreads, and that's
right.
Yeah,
and of course, because all these things are introduced before there is any ability to throw up a gate, right? That's the nature of social media. That's what it is unmediated. And when they try to mediate it, it's worse, right? Then you get the deplatforming and people silenced, and the sort of the decision that saying things like, I don't think boys should be in girls' sports, gets you censored and thrown off social media.
Worse, under the Biden administration, it got collusion between large tech companies and the government, which is in total violation of our First Amendment.
Right. I want to talk about the Trump statement, though, because what's interesting is, Noah, I didn't watch it, and what little I saw about it, which was oddly little, was very negative. I mean, my social media feeds are sort of split in half between people I follow on the right and people I follow in media to get news and see what the common conversation is like. And it was very negative. It was like, he didn't bring us together, and he's kind of calling for more violence. And he's saying that, government is going to investigate and see if there are networks that are involved here. And what was this a lone thing, or was somehow this was part of a network? So on the one hand, I don't see what's wrong with the president saying we're going to look down every avenue and try to figure out what happened here. And on the other hand, like, if he is implicitly saying that there is an active conspiracy, like to murder people like Charlie Kirk on the part of the left, there are two ways of looking at this. One of which is, if that's even remotely true, then it's fine he said it. If it's not remotely true, then it's not fine that he said it. And since he can't know whether it's true or not true, I guess he shouldn't have said it.
But this wasn't it. I watched it and talked about it with one of my sons, and it was interesting that my son's not super online, but his reaction was, "Isn't the president supposed to kind of try to calm things down and bring us together and all that?" And it struck me that actually we're not in that moment anymore. We've moved past that. Anything Trump would have said would have been criticized because of how polarizing a figure he is. I do wish that we had someone in that office right now who could bring us together. But the question I have is, I'm not sure that's even possible. You could have the Pope sitting there talking about baseball for 5 minutes and then discussing how we should all come together, and it still would be polarizing. So, and that is in part, John, as you say, because of how most people get their news and information now is also filtered through social media, which shapes how they understand and react to events. So it might be another sign of just how far we've come from the old 20th century way of people in power dealing with crises, because it didn't make a huge impact. I actually thought that J.D. Vance's Twitter post about
Obituary,
Charlie Kirk was lovely and heartfelt, and actually much more effective at conveying both what we've lost and what he thought of him as a person than anything Trump said.
Well, okay. So Abe, help me out here with your, the crushing morosity is the jokey theme of this podcast, but it's very hard I've spent my life as a neoconservative, being a defender of a supporter of America and the West, and the idea that the people who criticize America are doing so either disingenuously, ignorantly, without any sense of gratitude for the gift that it is to be an American and all of that. And on the other hand, I look around over the last couple of months and I see a country I'm not sure I want to be living in. I don't think I've ever said that before. I'm 64 years old. And obviously I lived through worse. Like I lived through the 70s. I was a kid in the 70s and all of that. But, a world in which you get to see this woman stabbed to death on the Charlotte light rail, a world in which you get to see Charlie Kirk shot to death, the Josh Shapiro's house being set on fire, Jews being murdered in the streets of Washington and Denver, and this kind of acceptance, this bizarre acceptance that the behavior of people on college campuses is a free speech issue and not a civil order issue, and the people who are being attacked on campuses simply have to suck it up, even if because of speech and all that. I don't like what I'm feeling about the country right now, and I've never been conditional about this. I loved America when presidents that I disliked were president.
I feel similarly. I still love what is great about the country, the ideals that it was founded on, and the enduring upkeep of the institutions that keep those ideals in place. We are still a unique nation with a unique purpose. One of the things that really got me about the fact that this is September 11th and yesterday was September 10th, looking back, if you look back on 9/11, it's an attack from outside, that was like, this was the ugly world bringing America into it. Now we have to go. Here we are in 2025, September 11th, and we're just attacking ourselves from the inside constantly. It's and it's terrorism. I mean, it went from international terrorism to domestic terrorism, and there is something of a through line.
And the terrorism you're talking about, 10 years ago, it was still external terrorism. In other words, like the Pulse shooting in Orlando was an act of international terrorism in a
Yes.
weird way. So was the shooting in San Bernardino.
Yeah.
That was when Trump said we need to seal the country off until we can figure out what the hell is going on.
They've sort of met in the middle, the international terrorism and the domestic terrorism, the jihadism and the radical Marxism. They are. It's this horrific fusion. Yeah.
But I don't like, the other thing though is when I say I don't like the feeling I'm having about America, I can't do this on the one hand, on the other hand thing that I would like to be able to do in a weird way if you're making a deep social critique. Look, we've spent the last 10 years examining the failures and problems on the right and trying to call out the bad behavior of people on the right, horrified by January 6th. I'm horrified by the fact that people are still apologizing, making apologia for January 6th, and are trying to rewrite what we all saw with our own eyes on January 6th and all of that. So that is a sort of on the one hand, on the other hand. And at the same time, I really do feel like this contagion is coming from the other side. That's why Noah's writing about left-wing violence. I mean, can we dig up examples of right-wing violence if you want to call it right-wing terrorism, uh, you can. I don't really know that anti-Semitic violence, like the Tree of Life shooting or the shooting in Poway or the attempt to shoot up, the synagogue in Texas, if those actually constitute right or left wing, that's a different. Anti-Semitism is deeper and does not follow proper lines of on this regard. Since, of course, the shooter in Washington was a Hamas sympathizer. So, but it feels to me like the assault that has led to the opening of the Overton window to domestic terrorism is 90% the result of the people that I disapprove of and don't agree with.
Well, there was, remember in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, when you would see extremist violence, you would see it on the left with remember the animal rights activists and the more extreme environmental rights activists. On the right, you would see it with anti-abortion activists who would bomb clinics and threaten doctors and kill the doctor. But again, to the point that we were all discussing earlier in the podcast, those were very specifically motivated radicals. And I think what Noah's piece in commentary a few months ago and what his book will likely show us is there, and to Abe's earlier point, there's a kind of meshing. And we say omni-cause as if it sort of captures this, but it's very disturbing how quickly the radicalization can happen and how unimportant the actual revolutionary goal needs to be. It's violence for its own sake. It's disruption for its own sake. And when people point to the more extreme edges of right-wing MAGA world or any of this and say rhetoric matters, I agree with them on that point, just as I agree when they point to people on the left, including plenty of sitting senators in the Democratic Party who say, we are at war, any means necessary. We have to stop this fascist Trump administration. That's bad on both sides. So that's where you can both sides it. But I think the danger of the current moment is that the violence becomes its own motivational tool. And you see, and Greta Thunberg being the perfect international example of the omni-cause type, she's on a boat because she just wants to be a perpetual revolutionary. And there are no consequences to her yet for that. We need to start talking about what kind of consequences we're going to mete out to this sort of violence, because the justice system does it, but culturally we have to have that conversation too.
I just don't think that there's enough of a consensus that the violence is unmerited or unjustified. Too much of the vanguards, and in this case, I do think both on the right and on the left. I mean, I was seeing some very disturbing things from some very MAGA figures yesterday talking about taking it back to them and vengeance and stuff like that, which is not what you want to hear at a moment like this, and at the same time, so that's a very big deal. I just don't know how we impose social consequences without social consensus.
Right.
That violent expression is the ultimate contradiction of the American experiment in self-governance, which is we channel our disagreements and our differences into political contest taking place among our representatives who fight it out in how they make laws and how they do things, and then how they determine what they support and what they oppose and whether they can get enough people to follow them in that regard is how we run our society.
But the impatience in this point that's an important point, because the impatience with the system exists in a very extreme form on the left. They want to pack the court. They want to get rid of the Electoral College. The idea that if the system doesn't give you the result you expected, like say in the last election, that the system itself needs to be burned down. There's obviously a strain of this among, some NatCon types on the right, but I think culturally, there hasn't been an acknowledgement among mainstream liberal people, slightly left of center, that is a huge structural issue for the left in general. It's not just the extreme progressives. That idea that the system itself doesn't work anymore, so let's tear it all down, that has deep roots on the left now.
And, one of my concerns is that not enough people want to live in a country where people can resolve things through debate. In other words, not just that they misinterpret and think we have to take matters into our own hands. But there's a kind of like gleeful cosplay among people who like want to act out life in a different society. In the one of the things that I always think of is Antonio Garcia Martinez, who is a tech personality, Silicon Valley personality, and an author. He wrote the book Chaos Monkeys, and he wrote he did a thread on X a couple years ago when an HBO movie about the January 6th insurrection came out. And I always thought this was really one of the smartest things I'd read in a long time. Antonio wrote essentially that he, as a person who has traveled the world, right, in elite circles and all sorts of different societies, recognized this sort of like acting cosplay for what it was, which is that in America, you don't actually have this sort of thing, like the storming of the Capitol to stop a transfer of power. And it's so unusual that when people try to act out what they think it means to have to storm the Capitol, you get guys in Viking helmets, right? Like there was a like noticeably immature and confused element to January 6th because it was people playing a role that they'd seen on TV. And it was very clearly people playing a role that they'd seen on TV. This is not what happens in America. And therefore, in America, people don't really know how to do it, right? People don't really know how to storm.
And by the way, this is an important point because that's part of the conservative response to the law enforcement measures taken after January 6th, which is, what do you mean we have to go to jail for 3 years? We were really only kind of kidding. Like you're punishing us too harshly. We didn't really we didn't really think that we could stop it or something like that. This is what when people at their sentencing, when they were asking for leniency, would say, I mean, I was kind of a little crazy. Like I thought maybe I could stop. How do I know that there was no way to stop it or that the vice president didn't have the power to not accept these documents or whatever? Like it's like that guy who went to the Comet Pizza,
Yeah, but ignorance of the law is not a defense.
No, I'm not.
No, it's not that it's an excuse. It's that people don't really understand. People, even when they're trying to do something that's wrong, in this country, there's no experience of storming the Capitol. And so when they do, they don't really understand what they're doing while they're doing it in terms of how to do it. And the danger is that your mask becomes your face, right? If we become a society where people act out these weird cosplay violent fantasies enough, you can become a society where people do know how to effectively storm a Capitol to stop a peaceful transfer
you
of
have
power,
a bad
etc.
one, and then maybe you get better at it later. That's part of the fear. But I'm not defending. I'm saying that the weirdness of the right-wing response is, hey, give us a break. Like, what you're lenient to liberal criminals, so you should be, lenient to us. And in fact, that's also part of the opening of the Overton window. Like, you have campuses getting set on fire, not technically, but like by these professors, people talking about how it's okay to kill Jews. I want Jews dead, or Zionists shouldn't be allowed to speak, or whatever. And if you don't nip it in the bud, and you say, I have no authority, I have no power to do anything about this, I'm the president of Columbia, I have no power to move on graduate students or whatever who are fomenting who are supporting violence and fomenting it on our campus rhetorically, I'm sorry, free speech trumps all, which is not actually true. Free speech does not trump all. We have two and a half centuries of non-libertarian rulings that say there is all kinds of speech that you can't engage in necessarily at certain moments. You subsidize it. You get more of it. You get more of the badness. And this is where Christine's point about how we need to stop doing X, Y, or Z. Well, unless there are real consequences to doing X, Y, or Z, you're not going to get it. You're not going to stop it. Like,
Now, I
you
will
need to,
one glimmer of
I
hope.
don't know if I'm being clear. I'm sorry.
Well, one glimmer of hope I saw yesterday evening and throughout the morning today was how appalled, how widespread the feeling of horror, appalled horror that anyone would celebrate this killing was. There are a lot more people who were horrified by what they saw on Blue Sky among the fringe lefties than were supportive of it. And I think that is another shift, because for all the reasons we've discussed about Charlie Kirk and his legacy, particularly among young people, that is horrifying, because he is a father and a husband, and was only 31 years old.
But one problem here is that it doesn't take a very large minority of people who believe that killing is good and cleansing and righteous to destroy life for the majority. If I mean, I don't even want to put a percentage on it, but if there are a few thousand Americans who are so radical and so inclined to ideological violence, that's more than enough to destroy everything.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that it sounds weird to say this, but we've seen the rise on social media over the last decade plus of the brands, right? Companies who like partake in the, in the meme world. But I do think actually that cultural institutions that are not political have a really important role to play here as well. And I actually was very moved by the fact that the New York Yankees opened their game last night with a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk, with his picture and an American flag on the big screen in a ballpark. That sort of reminded me a bit of, again, I'm not comparing, but after 9/11, when everybody went to a ball game and we all sang the anthem together, right? For the first couple times, it was like weirdly emotional to sing the Star Spangled Banner with 50,000 other people. To have, 50 or 60,000 people taking a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk signaled to me that immediately there were parts of America and parts of the culture, the non-political parts of the culture, there were parts that understood right away that a line had been crossed, and if that line is allowed to be crossed without serious, and immediate and definitive pushback, the line will be moved.
Well,
and so that was an example of something that I would like to see, and I was very happy to see, because normally people would say, the Yankees would say, I don't want anything to do with, Charlie Kirk's controversial. These guys will be mad, and this guy, we're just here to play baseball. I thought what happened yesterday was a good sign, and I hope a direction, that can help move things in the right way.
Big contrast to what happened on the floor of the House of Representatives, too, where there was profanity hurled and chaos and no ability to simply just have a unifying moment of silence without dissension. And
okay, so that's an interesting story, because if you go through that story about what happened, and the speaker was in
the wrong, by the way. You don't get to call for prayer unless you're the chat. There are rules about prayer on the floor of the House and who does it and when.
Okay, right. Mike Johnson said we're going to have a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk.
No, he called for prayer. He called for prayer.
No. There was a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk that was observed. After that, Lauren Boebert asked for a prayer to be said for Charlie Kirk openly. And it was at that point that voices started to scream, and we don't know who they were because the camera is stationary, and there were people in the gallery who were watching but couldn't see who it was. And there were voices saying no, and then the voices said, well, we didn't say prayer. Somebody said, we didn't say prayer for Evergreen High School, which was also, there was a school shooting yesterday that has now been completely ignored because of what happened to Charlie Kirk. And then there was chaos on the floor. And so it was like there was a moment of comedy, and then I'm not saying Lauren Boebert was wrong to say we should also say a prayer, but they did say a moment of silence. It was observed, and then the culture war began. Out of the mouths of one of the most irresponsible members of Congress that we have, it wasn't sufficient for her that they did a moment of silence. Then she wanted an act of prayer because she said something like,
but he did,
silence is nothing, prayer is active, or something like
but
that. And then people started screaming at her.
But
and
the
then
details here are important. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the detail here is important because he called for the moment of silence, and then he said, we ask everyone to pray for him and his family. And I think that's what probably triggered some people on the other side of the aisle. Because
but they observed the moment of
yes,
silence.
you're right about that. Yes.
So I think this is, I don't want to like be, Talmudic and hair splitting here, but they observed the moment of silence. And then Lauren Boebert said, now let's pray openly because that moment of silence was bullshit, is basically what she said. And then people started yelling. And
silent
then
prayers get silent results, is what she said.
Right. Silent prayers get silent results, which is, by the way, unbelievably offensive. And, Jews pray silently. One of the major prayers in the Jewish liturgy is the Amidah, which is said silently. And so I believe I was unaware that there is any tradition either in any homiletic that says that a silent prayer is meaningless. Most prayer is silent. So that was gross of her, as most of the things she does are gross. And then there was yelling.
Well, like anything else, John, everybody knows that the louder you are, the more effective you are.
Right. And then there was yelling and screaming. And then Anna Paulina Luna, fresh from saying that interdimensional beings, had been at her Arby's, yelled at the Democrats, "You effing did this." So, it was really bad.
If politics is downstream from culture, what would be important is if the politicians did a little more of what the Yankees did last night and a lot less of what they did in that eruption on the House floor.
Now, to be fair, it could have been 5 people. If you can't really hear what's going on, we only have one tape. It could have been 5 people out of 435. You don't want to overanalyze or overestimate how many people were ugly in this way, and we can all have our guesses as to what disgusting and despicable members of Congress might have been who decided to have a tantrum, even about doing it. In other words, like somebody, she said, "Let's have a prayer," and then somebody could have said, "Mr. Speaker, the chaplain has to call for the prayer," or something like that. Whatever. It was an effort to just push this political advantage in an unseemly way. Having succeeded at bringing unity, what Lauren Boebert wanted to do was cause disunity. And then the Democrats responded in Pavlovian fashion, or the radicals, whoever it was, in Pavlovian fashion, and then created this moment of deep embarrassment for the United States.
Yeah, just a reminder that we have a lot of people who don't behave like adults in our Congress, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, right. So we've been going for almost for an hour and a half, and obviously there's going to be much more to be said about this, but if I pull a McLaughlin Group game and give you all a surprise exit question. The exit question is this: on a scale of 1 to 10, I can't do a scale of 1 to 10. It is September 11th. We are reminded of this unprecedented assault on us that has really still continues to define our century, this 21st century, and America's role and reaction to it in relation to it. Are things in the wake of this commemoration and Charlie Kirk? Is the temperature going to cool? Are things going to get better in response? Or are they going, let's say, in the next 8 weeks? Or are they going to get worse?
What do you think my answer is?
Well, I know what Abe's answer is.
Go ahead, Abe.
I think things are going to get.
Fine, Abe.
I
Then
think-
on a scale of 1 to 10,
Yeah.
how much worse? No.
How much worse?
I don't know.
That's
But
the.
I don't even know how. I don't want to think of how. But
Well, thinking about how
Yeah.
almost creates a kind of pathway
yeah,
to how,
Right.
like enumerating the ways in which
certainly
it could
giving
happen.
voice to it. Yeah,
You don't want to get giving voice to it, giving somebody an idea, whatever. You don't want to do that.
yeah.
So you're going with worse.
I'm going with worse. Yeah, sorry. Truly, sorry.
Seth?
I think it's going to be basically the same, which is a form of worse. I mean, what I would like to say, in other words, is that we all feel the same way, which is just shock and fear, and like something has just taken the wind out of us. But I think that we just, the short memory and the way that social media is kind of real life these days, much more so than it used to be, or which I think that we'll kind of roll on, unfortunately, in whatever direction we were heading.
Christine?
I refuse to make a prediction about whether it's going to get better or worse, but I will say that I've been thinking a lot about 9/11 this morning and what it was like that day and all the people we lost, and then obviously about Charlie. And what it struck me as being a very stark warning about is that republics and free societies tend not to fall when they're attacked from the outside, but they collapse from within. And that is the point that we're at. It was contrasting the unity after 9/11 with the fracturing that we saw yesterday and today. And I think should be a constant concern for every American, and how they can, as individuals, repair that fracture in their own lives, in their own communities.
I'm going to go with worse. Also, unfortunately, I think that there are too many positive, evil incentives for people to make it worse than self-restraint on the part of people collectively wanting to make it better. And I just think there's no balance between the two of them. And as Abe says, it only takes, it's this problem of a society of 330 million people. If 2,000 of them decide that they're going to go out and do evil, they can do a lot of evil, and they represent a part per million, in our practically, or part per 100,000 or whatever it is. Ordinarily would have no effect on the body politic. And now, they can have an outsides effect, and the temptation will be very large. Now, maybe Seth is right, and that because of the combination of Irina's murder and Charlie's murder and all of that, there's going to be a heightened sense of place among people who just look at their phones. Maybe people will be more vigilant or feel less safe, and therefore have more eyes on the American street. And as we know from Jane Jacobs, eyes on the street is the way that you help prevent bad things from happening, because people need to do these things mostly in the shadows. That's why the guy has to crawl on a roof where no one is looking to take the shot. So that's the one possible hope in some weird way, is that a sense of collective responsibility and security will actually help us, because we will all understand in that sense that we're all in it together, and that nobody knows where the next gunshot or stabbing is coming. But history doesn't really reflect that that's how people respond. People go into hiding. They stay inside. It's not like they go out en masse to show that, we're not going to take this. They get guarded and protect themselves.
Right. And that was something that, we've brought up, Israel in this context, when this stuff comes up, that was that sense of we have to go back out to the shook, because the people who are
To go shopping.
putting a suicide bomber in a shook wants you to avoid the public square, whatever. That sort of gets built up, right? Now, it's not necessarily like day one everybody's like, oh, got to head right back out there. There's a sort of,
No, look,
it happens because you've been pulled into a
Yeah.
kind of civilizational struggle in a
Yeah.
way, and you have to, and that's
Yeah.
not learned behavior yet, and you almost don't want us to
Yeah.
have to learn that behavior, I guess.
I mean, I was in Israel during the Second Intifada on 3 different occasions, and I would not say that the Israeli attitude was we have to go back out to the shuk. People went out, they went shopping, and they went right back home as fast as they could because they didn't know where the next suicide bomb was coming from, and particularly if they were with their children and all of that. So that's of course these things can have a gigantic societal effect, but there need to be more of them. And as I say, it is kind of weird that Charlie Kirk is shot at the same time that someone is shooting up this high school in this very affluent suburb of Denver, and we barely even have registered that it happened. Not that there's, we've achieved this kind of sense of learned helplessness about school shootings, that reminds me of the crime wave of the 70s and 80s, where it's like, well, what do you expect? I mean, if you're going to go out in the street, you're going to get mugged. Well, you may go to a school. It's terrible. No one should get mugged. No one should, be in a school shooting. But what are you going to do? How can you stop it? You can't stop it. And we don't know how to stop it. And we don't know how to stop these things. And therefore, a very small number of people can do an immense amount of damage to the public weal. And Trump coming out not really proffering a message of unity, maybe that's a reflection of a current reality. He doesn't do it because it would ring false from him, number one. Maybe he doesn't believe it, number two. And third, it would fall on deaf ears anyway, because all that depersonalization has happened. And we don't feel like we're all in it together. We don't feel like people that we disagree with are fully the same as us, or a lot of people don't. And, this goes on for a generation or two, and that is where democracies collapse. I mean, if we have no trust in institutions, and then we have no trust in each other, and we have no trust in the viability of anything that we do or the safety of anything that we do, we collapse. And then the end result, as Matt said, is top-down authoritarianism, not anarchy and chaos. Somebody will come in and clean things up in some fashion in a way that will be very un-American.
Right. You can't uncross a Rubicon. And what happens after the Rubicon is crossed? You get a dictator, not a libertarian, city-state.
See, history teaches us many things. Okay. We'll be back tomorrow for thanks to Noah Rothman for joining us, for the absent Matt, Seth, and Christine, and Abe. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.